Relevant, useful, and easy to deploy career guidance can be hard to find, which is a big part of what this whole series is all about. The need for actionable, digestible tips and tricks has become more critical than ever through the COVID-19 pandemic. And our speaker tonight has made it her mission to be front and center as people work to navigate the job search, land a promotion, or venture onto an entirely new career path. She's a longtime recruiter, career coach, certified professional resume writer, and the voice behind the popular career blog, jobjenny.com. Jenny also partners with LinkedIn.com and has several and job-related video courses on the LinkedIn Learning platform. Having made a few career pivots herself, from journalist to corporate marketing professional to recruiter to entrepreneur, Jenny knows a thing or two about career pivots. She's also worked with hundreds of people as they retool their careers and lives. On that note, I'd like to turn things over to the presenter for today, Jenny Foss.
So thank you everybody for joining tonight and for tolerating that little bit of technical difficulty. I think that's kind of part and parcel of what we're living through right now is just kind of getting through it, right? So I'm guessing a lot of people who are here tonight are choosing this over, I don't know, The Voice or Cobra Kai tonight, and you're probably at a little bit of a crossroads. So if this sounds like you, I'm guessing you're a little bit confused or stressed on how to navigate from today to that next great job. So why is it so hard? It's hard for a lot of reasons. I mean, the obvious big one is COVID, but also there's a real lack of understanding, I think, of how the whole process of job search and career transition works. I think there's confusion among many. I mean, I've been a career coach for many years, and I can't think of a time somebody hasn't felt a little overwhelmed about how to retool their resume, or feeling a real sense of overwhelm, even if they're feeling really excited about a career pivot. And perhaps this sounds like you. So tonight, we are going to talk about career change. Because you know what, almost never does it involve just, spruce up your resume and call a few people in your network and things are going to happen. Career pivots almost always involve at least a fair amount of strategy. And sometimes they involve new extra schooling or new credentials or a significant amount of investment in terms of time or in terms of money. So it's really no wonder why so many people never really get further than that daydreaming stage when it comes to making a big career change. It just seems too hard. But that's a really big bummer if you're someone who feels pretty strongly that you just don't want to live the rest of your life or the rest of your career feeling unfulfilled or moderately fulfilled, or that you've just got this kind of dull toothache all of the time. So whether you're here tonight because you've lost a job due to COVID or some other reason and are now trying to retool, or you've just been kind of harboring some thoughts about what really matters to you and what you want to do next, you're in the right place. We're going to spend tonight talking about how to create a roadmap for a career pivot, so that you can, if you decide it's the right move, you can take a solid run at it. And so we're also going to talk about how to evaluate your ideas, assuming you have some, evaluate them objectively, and think about how you need to shift your professional brand, because you will, so that you're going to make sense to that next audience. And we're going to talk about your marketing materials, your resume, your cover letter, your LinkedIn profile, any of those things that you're using to to promote yourself or articulate your professional brand. If you're making a career pivot, you're going to have to make some changes to those. I also want to talk tonight about how to engage the support of others. This is by no means a let's go it alone kind of endeavor. You can and you should engage people in your current network and also make some plans to cultivate relationships with people working in jobs that are interesting to you, fields that are interesting to you, or people who could really help you kind of move forward faster than if you were choosing to go it alone. We're going to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of this presentation, but Oleg and I have discussed this. I want to make sure that if you've got questions that you don't want to forget about or you want addressed in real time as we go through this presentation, feel free to put them in the chat. Oleg's going to be monitoring that and he's going to flip into those so that we can cover them in real time. So again, these are the things that we're going to cover: how to evaluate that idea, how to create the roadmap, how to shift your professional brand, how to engage support, how to shift your paperwork, how to evaluate your progress, and then what to do. I put when it gets scary, but sometimes people think if it gets scary, but for sure it's when it gets scary. So here's my aha moment, and I know that's a very flattering picture of myself. So I went through a career pivot myself. Actually, I went through two. I'm going to flip back to the last slide here. I'm flipping forward. So years ago, I was the head of corporate communications for a company that sold coupons. Yes, very exciting stuff. So our company was selling coupons when 9/11 hit. So I don't know how many people on the call tonight worked through, lived through, remember 9/11, but it was you know, an incredibly substantial event, which is interesting because we are kind of living through history and big events right now. So during that time, I was in the office. I lived in Detroit at the time, so it was unlike on the West Coast. It was already work time, so I had gone into my office and watching as this unfolds. So understandably, a lot of our employees, especially the ones with kids, were really upset, and they were really wanting to leave. So my job was director of communications. And of course, I recommended to our executive team, you know what, everybody needs to be able to go home. If anyone wants to leave, they should be able to leave. So we had this one executive who had this big meeting planned. And again, let's remember, we sold coupons. So she didn't want to let people go because she didn't want to disrupt that meeting. And I remember looking her in the eye, and I mean, I'm young at this point, and mustering everything I had and saying, we make coupons. These people need to go home. And all of a sudden I was terrified, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get fired. I did not get fired. And she acquiesced. She did release anyone who wanted to go home, and almost everyone went home. But that was the moment that I decided, you know what? I don't want my boss's job. I don't want it. I'm on a trajectory that really doesn't suit me. And so I realized I needed to make a career change. But the challenge was this: I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do next. So guess what I did? Precisely nothing. So for 2 years, I did precisely nothing. I stayed in that job. I wasn't very happy. I didn't construct a game plan or on how to move forward. What I should have done is exactly what I'm going to teach you here tonight, is really think about what I wanted my future career to look like. What I should have done is think about what I wanted to feel like, what I wanted it to be like. And then I should have figured out, how can I get from the point where I'm at today to that spot where I'm in a new role or a new industry or in something that is better for me and is going to give me a bigger shot at being fulfilled. So I actually got kind of lucky. I had a friend who owned a small recruiting agency, and his firm supported the company I was a director of communications at the time. And he was forever coming by my office, sticking his head in and saying, you know what, you need to come and work for us. You know what, I think you'd be a really good recruiter. And for a long time, I was just like, oh, ha, ha, ha. I had a plan, this was where I was heading career-wise. But I finally got to the spot where one day, and I can't even remember what the catalyst was, but I picked up the phone and I called him and I said, okay, what does this entail? And so we talked it through, and I realized I was going to need to take a $30,000 pay cut if I was going to do this, but I had the upside of commission once I learned it. But that really served as a stepping stone for me to become first a recruiter, then a career coach, and obviously now to the spot where I own a business. I am incredibly happy in the work that I do. And I really, I am very blessed that I get to genuinely impact in a positive way a lot of people's lives. But it's not because I did things the right way. So what I want to recommend here tonight is the right way. So what I recommend is start with the why, the what, and the what's it gonna take. So since that aha moment, I have coached hundreds and hundreds of people. And of those who are planning to make a career transition or a job change, it's really common for people to understand that they're in the wrong career or the wrong place, but not have a lot of clarity beyond that. And you know what? That's okay at the front end. But if you're seriously considering making a career change, the first thing that you need to do is get clear on these three things. What's my why? This is where I would start. And I would get specific with it. Why are you thinking about this? What's exactly fueling your discontent or making you realize, okay, I got laid off because of COVID and I don't want another job like this? Are you bored? Are you in a dying industry? Do you want to be your own boss? What are those things? That is the absolute starting spot I would recommend. What is my why? And then I would think about I'm going too far, too fast. Then I would think about what's keeping me up at night. A lot of times people who are really unhappy in their jobs, they know they want to make a change, but they don't really understand, what's gonna make things better for them. So really assess, if you could, what's keeping me up at night. So I'm going to go back to that 9/11 moment for me and that period of my career. The couple of things, and this is even before 9/11, the couple of things that were really keeping me up at night, now that I reflect back, hindsight is 2020, is that I was thinking I was not in a job that was really contributing to any kind of greater good. Yes, helping people save money, yes. But this was coupons. I mean, we were selling coupons, and that just didn't feel like enough to me. And I also was thinking I wanted a job where my compensation was tied directly to my performance. And that was not the case back then. I was on a base salary, and I was really thinking, gosh, I could probably kill it at something where my performance was rewarded. So think about, what are your things that are keeping you up at night? And then the third thing is, think about, why do I think this new path is going to be better for me? Knowing that you're on the wrong path is one thing, but you really can't assume that the path that you're dreaming about or envisioning is necessarily going to be better. That's called the grass is always greener syndrome. And, we're always looking like, oh, if only I were over there, that's going to be a lot better. But before you start chasing after a new career, I would jot down some detailed notes on why and in what specific ways you think that different path is going to be better, and then try and or assess those as objectively as you can. Because sometimes when you go through this exercise, you're going to realize, that path I was envisioning is probably not as appealing or as realistic as I imagined. Or sometimes you're going to figure out that it's even more appealing. But you're not going to know this unless you ask yourself these questions. The next thing I would ask is, what is my what? What does this thing look like? What does this new job, entail? What does it not entail? What is it going to make me feel like? What career capital can I bring to this job? In other words, how are you going to be able to leverage your skills, your contacts, your experience, your personality to make this a successful transition? These are the very things that make up career capital, and they're super important if you're considering a career pivot. So I want to tell you a story. A lot of times I know people assume that if you follow your passion, then you're most inclined to have career fulfillment, right? Do what you love and the money will follow. How many times have we all heard that? But check this out. There is an author. He's actually a computer scientist at Georgetown University, and his name is Cal Newport. So Cal Newport, for his PhD dissertation, studied whether people who follow their passions in the long term report long-term career fulfillment. And surprisingly, what he found in his research is that statistically, those who follow their passions are less likely to find long-term career fulfillment than those who leverage existing career capital when they're making a career shift. And that's significantly lower. So it's like, what the heck? What is that? So for instance, say you're a lab technician and you love your, well, I guess it's your Zoom yoga class, because most of us are virtual right now. So you love your Zoom yoga class to the point that you decide, you know what, I think I'm going to open a yoga studio and I'm going to do virtual yoga as my living. So I ask you, do you think you're automatically going to have success and find happiness because you're passionate about yoga? So Cal Newport says, no, probably not. This is especially true if you're somebody who doesn't know the first thing about, small business operations, marketing, accounting. You don't have a big network of people that you can draw from to entice them to be your first clients. And if you don't have those things as you roll forward, your yoga studio is probably not going to be very successful at the front end. And so that's going to negatively impact your career fulfillment. So instead, what Newport suggests is that if it's much better off if you find something that at least sits adjacent to where you have some career capital. So it might not be exactly apples to apples what you're doing now, but maybe it's something for which you can leverage the skills, the knowledge, the expertise that you've built up already in a new way to create a new career or step into a new role. He actually wrote a book, and I highly recommend this book. It's called So Good They Can't Ignore You. And I think the subhead is how skills trump passion in the quest for work you love. So if this is hitting a chord for you tonight, I would definitely check out Cal's book. So as you consider your what, in addition to thinking through, what kind of career capital can I bring to this, you're going to want to think about what that next job title might be. So maybe here are the skills that I really want to put to use in my next job. Here are the things that I want to do, but I'm not really sure what that next job is, what it's called, who it's with. So here's an example of what you can do to narrow in on what those jobs might be called. Go over to LinkedIn and go into the search box and plug in some skills that you want to put to use, or titles that you think it might be, or a combination of the two. So if I'm an executive assistant and I love my job, but I am feeling like I want something that involves more strategic thinking, maybe some more complex problem solving, how do I figure out, if I'm not an executive assistant, what is that job called? So the skills that I chose, or the terms and skills, are right up here: executive assistant, strategy, and problem solving. And then when I hit see all results, you'll see on the bottom here, these are some of the things that I found. And interestingly, what I'm finding is chief of staff, chief of staff. And if I scroll further, chief of staff. So now I'm cooking. I may not have even known this job exists, but now I can go and read these job descriptions and figure out, is this what I have in my mind? And is this a likely job title that I should target? It's such a simple exercise that can really help you clarify, if you're not sure yet, what the next job is going to be called, and also, what your game plan should be in terms of who you should reach out to and how you're going to go about the actual search. There's also a thing called the ONET, which is the Occupational Information Network. And you might find this useful as you're trying to think through, the job titles that make the most sense for you. This is a free online database that it was developed actually originally during the 1990s by the US Department of Labor and also the Employment and Training Administration. So I will warn you that the user interface is a little bit clunky, but the resource is really robust, and it may help you narrow in on the types of jobs that you're targeting. It's really important if you're thinking about making a pivot. Oh, and thank you, Oleg. You're linking us to that. Okay, so now you've thought through your why and your what. Now you need to really get real with yourself on what exactly is it going to take a run at my career pivot. So do you need certain skills and credentials? Do you need certain training? Do you need a certification or maybe a license in order to make this happen? It's a lot better if you figure these things out on the front end, instead of applying for all these jobs for which you're not yet trained or certified to be a strong candidate for. So really take some time to study that. And honestly, if you're lacking any of that, what you can do is, sometimes, like, let's be honest, if you're, if you're a career coach like me and I wake up tomorrow and decide I want to be a medical doctor, that's going to be a long road. But sometimes it's really more a matter of finding an online course that's going to train you in certain skills that you're lacking, or maybe enrolling in a short-term, community college course, or getting a license. And these are the things that you really want to explore and decide, am I willing to make that investment of time and in some cases money? Doesn't always cost money because there's a lot of online learning opportunities like LinkedIn Learning or Udemy, Coursera. Some of those are very low cost or even free. But you're going to want to get some baseline proficiency in those things that you're realizing are a part of that next goal that you're targeting.
Hey,
Because
Jenny.
what you can go ahead.
Sorry, I'm cutting here just because you mentioned LinkedIn Learning and online courses. I just want to say that
Yeah.
you can actually get access to lynda.com or LinkedIn Learning totally free with your library card. So just to all the folks out there, just wanted to throw that in. Sorry, back to you.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So lynda.com was acquired a handful of years ago by LinkedIn. So LinkedIn Learning and lynda.com are essentially the same thing. And that's a wonderful resource that the library provides because there are, I think, around 15,000 courses on there today that offer everything from, photography to Google Analytics to I'm actually a partner of LinkedIn Learning, and there's a lot of job search and career development courses on there. So all of you LA Library members, that's a great resource to take advantage of, especially if you're realizing there are some skills that you need to shore up. Going through that exercise is also going to help you, make an honest assessment of, is this idea that I have realistic? Is it worth committing to? Even if it's going to require some time and investment on the front end. And again, it's so much better to determine this on the front end and not waste months and months of your time only to be, hit a brick wall, nobody's responding to me, after applying for all your dream jobs for months and months. So give yourself a shot, do that research in advance, and really think about it before you start applying. So finally, I'm laughing about this because this is about, where I'm at after 2020, the COVID baby. You want to do a gut check. You've done the front end work and you've gotten clear on the what and the why and the what's it going to take. So now you want to sit down and ask yourself some questions. Is this career pivot genuinely doable? Do I have the right credentials? Or if I don't, can I get them? Do I have the money? Or if I don't have the money, do I have a way that I can scrape it up or borrow it or ask a family member? Do I have the time? I mean, I have 3 kids. I know time is an incredibly valuable asset. Do I have the time, or can I find the time? And then, do I have the support from the people around me that I'm going to need? We all need support when we're going to do something like this. And if you feel like you don't, can you ask for it? Can you get it? And then the biggest question of all is, can I live with myself if I do nothing? So if you have answered yes, 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 and no to those questions, now it's time to construct a game plan. So I got really lucky with my career pivot. If I were constructing a game plan today, I would leverage some of the very things I'm about to talk about. My plan would have looked a lot different than the one I'm outlining here. And I want to share something with you. We all have a lot of dreams. We all have a lot of intentions. And that's super important. But I always tell people dreaming isn't doing. If you're serious about making a career pivot, you've got to build a game plan. And then you've got to execute on it. And so people sometimes ask me, how long should I give myself? And I always say that's actually a pretty personal question. It's situational. It depends on you. It depends on your finances. It depends on the role you're going after or the field you're trying to break into. There are a lot of variables that go into how much time should I give myself. But let's do a general rule here. As a general rule, I would say about 6 months. So 6 months is enough time to make some serious incremental progress, but not so much time that you feel like, oh my God, I'm going to be 97 years old before this happens. Now, of course, you can adjust that time period depending on your specific needs, depending on what happens in this crazy dynamic life we are in right now. But just make it long enough that you can dig in and do this justice, and yet not so long that it's just this open-ended timeline that, as soon as you get sidetracked by life or become discouraged, you're just going to drop it all. Now, what does the game plan need to look like? Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself here. I'm not shifting our brand yet. Hold on. So I launched jobjenny.com. Oh my God, I'm going to admit this. I had zero game plan. I definitely do not recommend this, but I will say from personal experience, because here I am and it worked, you really don't need a 16 chapter, formal business plan to get started. Now, you definitely don't want to scratch something out on a cocktail napkin and quit your day job. But I would say you can go with something in between. So as you think about, how to build it, I would first consider, where do you want to end up? Where do you want to end up? Begin with the end in mind. When you look ahead to that 6-month mark or that 1-year mark that you've set for yourself, where do you want to be? Here's an example. Maybe I say to myself, you know what, by this coming July, I will no longer be an accounts payable clerk. I'm going to be working for a software provider in a financial analyst role or in a risk analyst role. That is my goal. That's the end goal for 6 months from now or a year from now. So now that you have that goal, you're going to want to break things into milestones. Again, what skills do I need to acquire? And by when am I going to acquire them? Who do I need to meet? When you're switching into a new industry or a new job, it's really beneficial if you meet new people who are working in that field. And if you're employed right now, are there things that you need to wrap up in your current job? Are there personal things that you need to attend to between now and when you make that shift? Are there certifications or skills that you need to acquire, and so forth? So try to lay these things out so that you know what needs to happen in order to make progress, and so that you're not taken off guard, as you get rolling and like, I never thought about that. You can think about those contingencies in advance. And then once you get those milestones in place, I would break them into either a weekly schedule or daily to-do lists, or both. So certainly allow yourself some flexibility. I mean, life happens. Things come your way. My daughter had an emergency orthodontist appointment in the middle of something I was trying to get done recently. My mom has a hip injury and she needs groceries. She needs medication. These things are going to come up. But if the past year has taught us nothing else, it's taught us that we can roll with the punches. So there's no need to throw up the white flag if your game plan gets a little skewed or your week gets thrown off track. Just make whatever amendments you need to and keep going. the most important thing is here is that you're making incremental progress on a continuous basis. There are going to be days that you simply need to write off. But it's those small, consistent steps forward that aren't going to, just get you moving forward, but they're going to give you the confidence that this is actually a very real possibility. And what they tend to do is also give sort of a snowball effect. So as you see the fruits of your daily or your weekly efforts, your momentum is going to build. And that's a really good thing. So how do you ensure that this progress is happening? I would probably sit down on the weekend or on Monday morning and just look at your week ahead and think about, where can I schedule some activities in those open areas of my calendar that are going to genuinely move me forward, even if this is just small windows of time. And by the way, I know that I sounded incredibly Midwest in that last little blurb. I am from the Midwest, and all West Coasters know it. So just point taken. That was a Midwest moment I was having. So some of the action items are maybe you're going to say, all right, from 6 to 8 on Tuesday night, I'm going to research food and beverage companies in my area and figure out who the contacts are that I might reach out to. Or I'm going to fine tune my LinkedIn profile. Or I'm going to ask my partner if he will introduce me to his college buddy who I know works at a company that I'm interested in. You get the gist. By knowing day by day what you're going to tackle, here's what you're going to avoid. That moment where you're like sitting at your computer, okay, I'm working on my career pivot, and just kind of aimlessly flailing around on websites. That's going to get frustrating, and it's going to waste your time. So stack the cards in your favor. Build yourself a game plan. So in addition to having a game plan, I'm once again getting ahead of myself. You're going to want to have a method to track your progress. It can be anything. It can be a simple Excel file. It can be Basecamp. It can be, Google Docs, tables in Word. Whatever you feel comfortable using, that's what I would use. So keep track of, your activities, your contacts, when you maybe want to follow up with someone, notes of, what you're thinking and feeling about different things. It's really going to do you wonders to be able to just see it all in one place and have that method of keeping on track. So now you're going to want to start thinking about your brand. And this is probably one of the most important parts about making a career transition. And here's backwards again. Jenny is hitting on all cylinders here on the prezo. So here's a general rule of thumb. The easier you make it for your target audience to understand you, to get you, the better the odds are that they're going to want to know more. I mean, that's just it. So how do you achieve that? You achieve that by first figuring out, what is the must-have messaging here? What does my next employer, my future employer, need to know about my capabilities the moment their eyes hit my resume, hit my LinkedIn profile, or get on the phone with me, so that they understand how and why I make sense for this job that I'm trying to transition into. You got to iron that out. You got to make it incredibly easy for that recruiter, that hiring manager, or anyone else you're looking to support a career transition. Because nobody's going to deduce that for you. As much as you might want people to be able to or be willing to connect the dots for you, they're not going to do it. They don't have an incentive to do it. It's your job to help them figure out why you are a smack in the forehead, obvious fit for that job, even if you don't have a linear career path. You know, you're going to be competing with people for these jobs who do have a linear career path. They've gone, you know, up the ladder in that exact industry. So how are you going to compete with that person or those people? Here's what I would consider doing. Think about how you can aggregate your skills, your experiences, your education in a way that maybe makes you look like an even better candidate than that person who's taken the linear path. How can you spell that out? I view it like as a math equation. My experience, my education, my skills equal a really amazing candidate. I would absolutely think about how you can spell this out. If you're going to be a serious contender in a new field, it's essential that you shift your professional brand and do it in a way that makes sense to people. So I'm going to give you an example. This is kind of a fun one. A while back, I worked with a CIA agent. So my CIA agent client had been for years involved in these intense field assignments in incredibly desolate locations. And then one day he woke up and said, you know what? I would rather be a geologist. So he went back to school to be a geologist. He earned his degree. He was the top of his class. He was a teaching assistant and a really popular one. And he had done a bunch of field work as part of that degree. But when he started applying for jobs, nothing happened. Nobody was responding to his applications, none. But his classmates, many of whom were younger and never had, jobs before this, they were getting calls for the exact positions that he was trying to land. And he was just baffled. And he was really frustrated. So that was kind of the premise of him hiring me. So when he hired me, it did not take a long time for me to figure out what was going on. He was branding himself as a CIA agent. Not intentionally, of course, but almost everything about his resume, his LinkedIn profile, was just screaming, hey, I'm a CIA agent. And it was only like merely whispering, oh, I'm also a promising geologist. So his professional brand was almost unnotable or unnoticeable to those recruiters that he's sending his stuff out to, because they're sitting there like, why is the CIA agent applying for our jobs? And so I asked him this question, in addition to the obvious stuff that we needed to add to his resume, I asked him, what about your background as a CIA agent maybe is going to be advantageous to your career as a geologist? And here's what he said. He said, I am trained to navigate and overcome the most extreme environments in the most remote locations. You could literally drop me anywhere and I would not only be okay, I would absolutely nail the assignment. And this was his advantage. He was applying for field geology positions that he wanted to go to places that were like desolate dig sites. This picture happens to be something in Hawaii. And so what we did with his project was connect those dots for the people reviewing his resume. They were not deducing it on their own. We shifted his brand messaging in a way that made it totally obvious that his CIA experience plus his geology degree plus the field experience that he had during his degree equals this outstanding candidate. And he had a job interview within 3 weeks of our project closing out. 3 weeks. So my key point here is this: when you're making a career pivot, you've got to pivot your messaging so that you make sense to your future employer. It is not their job. They might not be qualified to connect those dots. It's your job to do that for them. All right, now we're going to talk about mobilizing your people. So it's really important to enlist the people around you and build new relationships when you're working toward a career change. Even if you have the most brilliantly crafted resume, you're always going to need to leverage your connection when you're making a pivot, or I would say almost always. And again, this goes back to you're competing with people who are an obvious on-paper match. So give yourself that advantage in reaching out to people. This could be your friends, it could be your colleagues, this could be former colleagues or thought leaders in the industry that you're trying to reach out to. It could be alumni from your college. I'm not sitting here just saying, hey, you guys go network. Oh, I am saying we got to get back to our main presentation though. I hate that when people do that. They say, it's not what you know, it's who you know, or what you got to do is just leverage your network. Okay, bye. And that leaves you sitting there going, what exactly am I supposed to do? What steps do I take? What am I supposed to say when I reach out to people? So I'm going to give you a few tangible things here tonight that you can do to start mobilizing people around you to support this effort. So first thing I would do is start with your close contacts. So I think a lot of the time we assume that the people around us, whether that's your family members, your friends, your close colleagues, we assume that these people know exactly what it is we do when we get up in the morning and either go to work or go sit in front of our computer screen for the day. But do you know, like with your family members, with your friends, exactly what their jobs entail? I know I don't. And you know what skills they're using on a day-to-day basis? So you probably don't. And the same goes for you. And so if you were to approach like your brother-in-law or your best friend at work and say, hey, you know what, I'm trying to switch careers. Do you think you can help? Of course they're going to say, yeah, I'll be sure and help. I'll keep an eye out for you. Send me your resume. I'll keep an eye out. But the problem with this is if they don't know what they're keeping an eye out for, they're probably not going to do much after that moment. And that's not because they don't care about you. They just don't have any idea what they're keeping an eye out for. And so for this reason, I suggest that you craft as part of your overall plan what I call a networking letter. And what a networking letter is something that spells out with clarity to people, hey, here's what my situation is. I'm thinking about making a transition. And these are some of the skills I'd really like to put to use in that next job. And I've done some research, and in my research, I think my potential next job title might be X, Y, or Z. And my dream companies are these companies. And then you end that letter, or it could be an email, or it could even be, I'm on the phone with you. Here's how you could help. And what I would say for number 5 there of the here's how you could help is something like, if you know of someone who works in one of these types of jobs or at one of these companies, I would really appreciate if you could make an introduction or point me toward that. Likewise, if I can ever help you out, that, I'd be very glad to do that. The whole point here, though, is by defining this with a little more clarity with the people around you who are most likely to have your back, you're putting yourself in a much better position to have people be genuinely useful um, in helping you through this time period. The next thing I'm going to suggest is the dreaded informational interviews. So I really think that informational interviews are perhaps the single most underutilized tool in job search. And that's for a lot of reasons. They're overwhelming to a lot of people, especially if you've never met a person that you're reaching out to, and super especially if you're an introvert. Even if you do know a person, I think it can be hard to ask for an informational interview, but it's also hard to know, like, what do I do once they say yes, you know? What is an informational interview? So an informational interview in a nutshell is this. It is a short conversation that allows you to gather information about a company, about a certain type of job, about an industry. It's not a job interview. The purpose is to help you better understand a job, a field that you're interested, or the particulars of a company that maybe you think you want to work at next. You know, with luck, you're going to build some allies within organizations or within an industry through the course of those conversations, and that's really going to help you move forward in the search. But this is not a job interview. Who can you ask for an informational interview? You really can ask anyone. I mean, you can ask senior executives, you can ask HR people or recruiters or friends of friends working at companies that are interesting to you, or even peers working in your same industry. But whoever you decide that you're going to start with, I would apply some strategy, some thoughtfulness to that. You want the person to say yes, of course you do. And you also want that session to be genuinely useful, both in the immediate term, but hopefully going forward. You know, hopefully you're going to build some lasting ties through those conversations. I have found over the years that your lowest hanging fruit in terms of informational interviews is going to be to get started with your immediate connections. You know, the people you already know, or maybe friends of friends, maybe fellow alumni at the university that you went to. I have found that university alumni tend to take very good care of one another. So that's a group that you can readily access through LinkedIn, and a group I would not overlook, because LinkedIn will tell you, you know, X number of people from Michigan State University work at this company. Great, you can start reaching out to them. And so then the question becomes, all right, Jenny, I know I need to do informational interviews. What do I do in them? So here are some recommendations I have, you know, for making the ask and getting the yes. Number one is be succinct in your request. I think you can probably all agree with me that, especially from a stranger or a very loose connection, you don't really want to get a 22 paragraph email from someone. You want it to be, here's who I am, here's why I'm reaching out to you, this is why I find you interesting, and might you be willing to do this? The second recommendation I have is to ask for a 15 to 20 minute conversation. You want to be incredibly mindful of someone else's time when you are asking them for something. And when you ask for 15 to 20 minutes, and assuming you get on this call with them, make sure you stick with that time frame. And then a pro tip that I will recommend is, if you are starting this outreach, if you are starting to ask people for their time, Consider in that very first request email or in-mail, if you're using LinkedIn, to subscribe to a free scheduling software. So there are a lot of them out there. I happen to use Acuity, Acuity, scheduling, but there's also, like Calendly and several others where they have a basic free option. So if you sign up for that, what you can do is integrate it into your Google Calendar or your Outlook or whatever, calendar you're using. And then when you reach out to that person, you can say, here's who I am. Here's why I'm interested in you. I'd love to talk for 15 to 20 minutes. If that's something you'd be open to, here is a link to my calendar. I would love to have you schedule anything that's convenient. What this does is eliminate that, well, what about Tuesday at 4? Ooh, that doesn't work. Well, what about Wednesday at 6? And you have to go back and forth, 20 times, which could then, discourage somebody from saying yes. So think about getting that scheduling software and building that into your ask. And now when you go into the interview itself, I think I popped over too many. Here are some questions that I would ask. What made you decide to join this company? Or, based on your experience, what are some of the skills that are really important for somebody trying to transition into IT project management? If you were me, what would you invest in terms of training and credentials, and so forth. And then the final question I would always ask in an interview, an informational interview, is this. Hey, I really appreciate the time that you've spent today. Can you think of maybe one or two other people that I should introduce myself to or should be talking to? Right here, you are creating an opportunity for what I call the snowball effect. They might say, hey, yeah, you know what, come to think of it, you should talk to so-and-so, and I'm really happy to introduce you. But even if they don't, even if they just give you a couple of names, you can then follow up with that person and say, you know what, I just did an informational interview with Sue, and she said you might be a great person to talk to get a little bit more information about IT project manager jobs. So as you can see, that can kind of keep the momentum going if you ask that question at the end of an informational interview. And then the last thing I'll say about informational interviews is if that person gives you some advice and you follow up and that advice works, be sure and loop back to that person and say, hey, thanks, you had recommended I do X and it worked. That's a really great way to not only stay in touch with that person, but really make them feel good that they've been useful to your efforts. Now we're going to go into the paperwork. So we touched a little bit about the importance of shifting your professional brand if you're making a career pivot. So as you shift your brand, you want to make sure that you transition all of your marketing materials. And by marketing materials, I mean your resume, your LinkedIn profile, your cover letter, pitch letters. If you're deciding that you want to create a personal website or a portfolio, all of these tools and platforms should be representative of the direction you're heading. Now, I do understand if you are a covert job seeker that you're going to need to use some care with LinkedIn, because obviously if you have colleagues or your boss as connections on LinkedIn and you make it really obvious, hey, I'm, shifting from being an engineer to a laboratory scientist, they might wonder what you're up to. So use a little care with that, but you for sure want to make sure that everything is lining up and pointing you toward where you're heading instead of where you've been. Going back to the CIA agent, the more you can make sense to people, the more, the better the odds they're going to want to talk. So I want to talk for just a couple of minutes before we move on from the paperwork about cover letters. And I know sometimes people think, whoa, nobody ever reads the cover letter. And in some instances, you're right. But I think that cover letters can be incredibly valuable tools for pivoters, especially when you consider that most of your competition is either not doing a cover letter or treating it as just this absolute afterthought and just dishing up, piles of nothing. So when you're a pivoter, you can use that cover letter to really connect the dots for that reviewer of what you're doing here, what your plan is, where you're coming from. Here's who I am and why I love your products. Here's why I'm applying for your job. And here's specifically what I can walk through your doors and deliver. You can also say, and I've done this before on client cover letters. So you can also say, you might be wondering why an accountant is applying for your marketing manager job. Allow me to explain, and then kind of walk them through, why you think you make sense for that job that you're applying for. There is a LinkedIn Learning course that I have done called Writing a Cover Letter. I put the URL right here. If you do feel like you want or need support in crafting cover letters that will really support you through a transition in your career, I would encourage you to jump in on that. I also on jobjenny.com have a shorter course. It's a self-paced video course called Cover Letter Crash Course. And you'll see that right in one of the tabs on jobjenny.com. I want to talk about progress because you're probably not going to see, like just this glorious linear path to success when you make a job pivot. And that's true with anything meaningful in life. It's rarely a straight line. It's sometimes more of a roller coaster. You're going to face challenges along the way. You're probably going to take pause at certain points along a career pivot and wonder if it's worth your while, or really realize that you're going to have to course correct and shift direction. And I just want to encourage you that this is a normal part of the process. I actually would feel a little more worried if I worked with somebody who was like, well, everything is smooth sailing, the sky is the limit and nothing bad is going to happen. Because if it's all smooth sailing, that may be a red flag that you're ignoring some of the important cues along the way that you should stop and kind of think more clearly or spend some more time on something. Or it could mean that you're rushing the process and you're going to end up in a job that's maybe different but not the right thing in the long term. So whatever the case is, if you are along the timeline right now, or if as you get moving on a pivot you're experiencing some hiccups or setbacks, just realize that this is a very natural part of the process, and just take that moment to evaluate, how are things going? How are things feeling? Does this feel right? If it doesn't, if I'm going through a setback, what should I do? What should my next move be? Do I need to fine tune this? Do I need a new strategy? Maybe something has changed in your life personally and it's going to prompt you to modify your plan. I talked a little bit earlier, you got to have a game plan. But if you have such a rigid game plan that you miss these important cues, or you don't honor situations that demand that you take a pause or retool, it's probably going to, limit the success that you have in really taking this thing the distance. Life is happening really fast and furiously right now, to say the least. And there's a lot of stuff that we can't control. And, our job as humans isn't to control every last variable. I mean, we simply can't. So what I would strongly encourage you to do is figure out what are the variables through this process that I can control. What can I control? And then make the proper adjustments along the way. Just be sure and not translate, fine tune or, course correct or adjust, into ditch this whole plan. Because you may very well miss out on something incredibly worth your while if you allow those daily pressures or demands to get in your way. I mean, fitting career pivot into your day-to-day equation is almost never going to be convenient. I just wouldn't let that derail you, especially if this means a lot to you. What do we do when it gets scary? What do you do if it's scary right now? Change can be really terrifying. And so if you start feeling like, gosh, this is really scary, I'm going to run out of money, or I'm not equipped to handle this, or, my spouse says I'm crazy for wanting this in the first place. What do you do? How do you keep from going off the cliff? So any kind of change, even great change, it's scary for all of us. I mean, it's terrifying. Fear of the unknown is terrifying. Fear of failure is terrifying. What are people going to say about me if I don't pull this off? It's just a really tough thing when you go through a career pivot. I mean, I've been through 2 career pivots, and I had plenty of people around me discouraging me or making me feel really scared that it wasn't going to happen. So you got to ask yourself, what is the secret of people who pulled this off? What's the secret? Are they more talented than me? Are they smarter than me? Are they luckier than me? And my answer to that is no, none of the above. Well, maybe they're lucky and maybe they're pretty smart, but really what I have found over all these years with myself and with all of the clients that I've worked with is that the real secret for people who make it through the career pivot, who make it through this transition that they want, is this. They took one small, deliberate, and brave step toward that goal every single day. They took a step when it was inconvenient. They took a step when, the wheels were falling off the bus in their daily lives. They took a step when they were tired, when they were discouraged. Even if it's just one little thing that you can do to keep yourself moving, I mean, that's truly it. It's a marathon. It is not a sprint. So the people who were truly successful, they're the ones that decided, you know what? I am doing this. I'm doing this even if it's inconvenient. I'm doing it if it's hard. I'm doing it if it's terrifying. I am going to muster up every little bit of grit I have every single day, and I'm doing this. Okay, and maybe a little bit of wine. But that's really the secret. And now here's the good news. None of us are born with grit. We are not born with grit. Grit is something we can muster. So if you know in your heart right now that you have something more or something different to offer this world, and you've decided that this is worth taking a run at, maybe it's time to muster the grit. Maybe it's time to bust out your laptop. Maybe it's time to dedicate a couple of hours in the after hours and just get to the business of your career pivot. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. I'm really excited to hear from you. I'm excited to hear the questions and learn more about what people have going on. I'm going to flip over into me staring really wholeheartedly at you all to give you a little bit more about me. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see some ways that you can get in touch with me.
All right. Well, Jenny, thank you very much for your excellent presentation.